Okay. So hi and welcome and thanks for stopping by. I'm here today with Naomi, who's going to introduce herself in a second. And we are here to talk about, for us, the importance and the impact that the book Untamed, you can see on my sticky notes, by Glennon Doyle has had on our lives, had on our experiences. I think it's a really powerful book, and so does Naomi. So hopefully you'll get something out of this video that you can contribute in the comments, let us know your thoughts, but also some things to ponder and channel in terms of your own life and experiences. So Naomi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Naomi. I'm an empowerment coach, and I'm really excited to just get into this book with you and talk through some of the themes and how I think it's really helpful and how it's helped me.
Wonderful, thanks. Okay, let's jump in. I think it's important to note that when we look at any sort of text or video or topic or theme, to acknowledge that we're coming at this from our perspective and to acknowledge that we all have our own experiences. In fact, me and Naomi have been doing some work together in terms of our own shadow work, in terms of our own kind of growth and development from some of the themes in this book. So we're coming at it from our own perspective. And I think that's really important to acknowledge when you watch any sort of videos, is how does it relate to you? You know, we're both still on our journey, aren't we now, in terms of development. So that's just something to note and to recognise. I think one of the first themes that we can't ignore in this book is the concept of being caged. The title of this book is Untamed, Stop Pleasing, Start Living. And for me, that was a really significant draw and a thread that runs throughout the book in a number of different aspects and a number of different themes. So Naomi, I'm going to kind of interested to know your thoughts on that in a second. But this idea of being caged is Glennon's way of looking at the constrictions that society creates, that we put ourselves in, that we live in on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes very blindly live in and not having an awareness of that. Naomi, what did that cage theme of Tabitha mean for you in that book?
Yeah, exactly the same. And I'd even, go as far to say as it's because we can then ask the question, well, who's society and who's put these cages up? And actually what she beautifully does the whole way through, I mean, every word is carefully hand-picked to mean something more than what it means. So when I'm like listening to it for the second time, I'm getting a wider picture, and I'm sure as I listen to it again, I'll get a wider picture again. So it's not only the cages that maybe society puts on us, it's then the cages that we then help keep locked and further build upon by becoming society ourselves as we go through our stages of development and as we turn into adults, I guess. So it's so beautifully written. And yes, this idea that we're in a cage that a lot of the time we're totally unconscious about being in. And every time we think we're conscious about being in, we probably need to look again and realise that there's some more we've missed. And then the cages that we affirm and place other people into and ourselves into. So this isn't about being an empowerment coach. I'm so big on taking full responsibility for everything, and that's a whole other subject in itself. But it's not about going, I've been placed in a cage by society and this isn't fair and I'm a victim. It's noticing how we've allowed ourselves to be placed into cages and how we feed into that as well. And we're all part of that problem, and we can all gently wake ourselves up from that and help each other not to do that to ourselves.
Totally. And there's a lot of different ways that Glennon examined some of these cages, and the ones that really stood out for me, and again now I'll see which one's kind of connected for you in a second, but the social constructs or the cages that Glennon talks about in terms of her own life and her own experiences are things around religion, sexuality, the ideas that people have of her, the expectations that people have of her, and those are all kind of really, I think, prominent in the world today, and in wherever we look in society. I think those are things that kind of jump out at us. But how those things in themselves aren't bad, but actually it's the expectations and almost the human element of religion, for example, of sexuality, the brackets, the boxes that we have as society. And for those of you who haven't read this book, Glennon goes on a very powerful journey in terms of her own life. She completely changes her life around in terms of her relationships, in terms of her attitudes with other people, and her priorities shift. And I think that's, when we come out of those cages, something that she really, from my perspective, Glennon would really kind of promote as being something to be important. Which cages jumped out now for you that she talks about?
Yeah, so certainly the religious cages, her sexuality, then the feminine and masculine cages that we pass down to our children, that we try and place ourselves in. Yeah, I think as well, for me, the fact that, like, at one point she starts talking about water being pulled into boxes maybe as well. And, like, you know, what about if there wasn't even a box? Because I think what's tempting to do, or probably necessary to do, when you're on a journey of self-empowerment, self-improvement, whatever route you're taking, is to redesign yourself. And a lot of the time, all people do is just redesign another cage or another box that they go into, and then they expect other people to be in as well. Obviously, this is all subconscious. We're not aware that we're even doing it, because we don't want to be in cages and boxes. Saying that, sometimes people do because it feels safer there, because we're told it's safer there. So it was all about completely blowing the boundaries, the full stop, blowing the boundaries off everything, and a certain amount of using your intelligence as well to say, well, who even created this box in the first place? Especially when we want to, like, look at religion. You know, we're following possibly this religion, if it's applicable to you. Who made up these rules? Who, like, decided this for us? Who are we listening to? And then it's kind of going, well, instead of just following that and being in that cage or that box and creating another one, blowing the boundaries completely and seeing what's actually in alignment for you. I feel like I've rambled and repeated myself a little bit there. But so religion, definitely for me, and what it means to be a woman as well, because sometimes I think when you go maybe down more of a feminist route, and this is what I mean by creating other cages and other boxes, it's almost like, to be a feminist, you have to start ticking other boxes and fitting into other cages to be part of that. But actually, what about if it is okay for you to wear a bra and wear makeup and want to be a stay-at-home mum, and that's genuinely in alignment for what you want to do? Does that then mean that you can't be a feminist in other ways and have other opinions? Is it that we have to be inside these boxes one way or another? We have to take a side one way or another? And for me, certainly when I work with my clients as well, it's all about blowing all of the cages, all of the boxes, all of the boundaries, and coming into alignment with what we actually truly think at our highest level.
Yeah, I think you make some interesting points there. I think going back to, I can't remember the phrase you said, but knowing why you're in a box, if you're putting yourself in a box purposely, or if you're trying to remove these boxes, cages. Glennon uses a quote in there, and I'm going to butcher the word, so don't take this word for word, but she says something about, who does it benefit for you to feel this way? And I think that's a really powerful message in going, if we feel and choose to live our lives without conscious alignment, who's benefiting from that? Who's benefiting from our thoughts, our desires, our experiences in this world? And that, for me, takes us on nicely, actually, to this idea of knowing your knowing. And Glennon talks about her knowing as a part of her, as something she has to learn to sit with. In fact, she sits in a closet, doesn't she, and gets to practice that in terms of a ritual for her. But her knowing what I would call is intuition, her divine feminine intuition is her knowing deep inside of her what her alignment is. But I think there's a lot of shame around that. And I think there's a lot of shame around trusting yourself and trusting your instincts. And I guess, Naya, as your kind of part of your coaching role, it's about getting people to tune into that. Be them, I know you're a female empowerment coach, but I think actually everybody can do that. But it's connecting to that for me as a divine feminine part of me. And I think that kind of idea of you can be a feminist and, you know, whatever box people want to put themselves in. I as you know, do a lot of research around gender as part of my doctoral studies, and some of the feminist kind of arguments that come through are exactly that. They're creating for me more boxes. And when I'm doing a lot of alignment work to try and remove boxes in my life and in the lives of those around me, I think it's very easy to have an illusion that we're removing boxes, but actually creating smaller boxes. And I think that's quite a path that we need to be aware of. What does this knowing your knowing mean for you?
So knowing your knowing for me is a direct connection with the highest part of yourself. You might want to call it God, source, universe, higher self, Holy Spirit, whatever words work for you. I'm okay with more religious words now. There was a time when I definitely wasn't because of my upbringing and my boxes and cages. But yeah, that for me. And it's interesting that you say for you, it's about connecting to your divine feminine. I wouldn't even give it a feminine or a masculine. Maybe I'm tapping into different parts of it, but it's everything. It's both. It's the highest self, higher power. And yeah, you're right. That's something that's very hard to sit with. It's also very hard to know if you are tapping into that side of yourself sometimes, or whether you're tapping into ego. I don't think it matters if the intention is correct, because you can only go from where you are and not be afraid to get it wrong. And it is a process and a journey. And if you look at all the teachers, the great spiritual teachers or leaders in history, that again, humans have put their own boxes and cages around, but that's another story. They've only ever pointed the way. Okay. And as a coach, I feel like I guide people from the side to their, I help guide people from the side to their own knowing. And there's so much of us that just wants this validation from everybody else. And Glennon says at one point to her children, if you have the opportunity of letting yourself down or letting somebody else down, it is your duty to always let somebody else down. Always be, you know, and we're taught the complete opposite of that, aren't we? Okay. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. Yes, that's very important. Put other people first. Maybe, you know, maybe there's some situations where that's great and really helpful. But in this circumstance, if you've got the opportunity to let somebody else down or yourself down, always let them down. Because if your knowing knows that something's right for you, even Glennon's book, even us dissecting it, me as a coach, you as a lecturer, anybody as a teacher, you can never actually just stamp somebody with something. You have to just help them get to the right answers for them. So I've forgotten what your question was, but for me, my knowing is, even when I want validation from somebody else, and even when I need some help with it and some guidance with it, because we're all human and we need it, even if it goes against everything, probably especially everything society says, if my knowing is telling me something else, then that's what I need to follow and go with. And I think for me, especially maybe what we think our parents are saying about things, And I don't even mean literally saying, I mean the voice in our head saying, that you turn inside yourself and go with yours, even if you get it wrong.
There's a section in, I'll come back to some of the points you raised in a sec, but it's just reminded me, there's a section about halfway through the book, isn't there, where Glennon makes a decision, quite a, I was going to say drastic, I don't know if that's a negative word for it, but a drastic decision in terms of where her life is going, in terms of her relationships and her children. And she has that very difficult conversation with her mum, in terms of her mum's, we're all, you know, I know you're a mum, and I'm totally guilty of doing this, of worrying and over worrying, and actually that worry, I think, emits onto children. But she has a very key and clear turning point in the book where she goes, actually, your fear and your worry is your own. I can't let it come onto, I think she uses the analogy of an island, doesn't she, for her family, and protecting family at all costs, in terms of kind of the beliefs of other people, and I guess for her, letting her own kind of knowing lead her family as a mother, I think is a really powerful thing. But yeah, coming back to knowing your knowing, for me, the reason I make that connection to divine feminine is because I think that is the connection to higher self, connecting to divine feminine being love, higher self, God, whichever word people want to use it for. But I think you made a good point there about the balance between ego and intention. I think, like you, if we have the right intention, I think love is more powerful than ego, but that's something you have to practice. I've learned that. I don't know if that's the same for you now, but it takes practice to kind of drown out other noises, drown out other thoughts, be that through meditation and sitting in a closet as Glennon does, or going for a walk, or however people choose to do that. But it takes practice, and it can be really uncomfortable. We've all got our own work to do, and to sit with that, I think, is really quite a powerful thing to be able to do.
And if you feel called to put yourself out there in a vulnerable way, I mean, even as we're doing now, we're talking through some themes that in 5 years' time, a week's time, a month's time, 10 years' time, we might look back at this and think, okay, that's not necessarily in alignment with what I think now. And this happened with Glennon, because when she met, I don't want to give too much away about the book in case people want to read it, but when she meets the next chapter of her life, she's actually there doing something, it's her previous book, that would totally contradict everything that's now happening to her. And even Oprah Winfrey, when she's interviewing her, you know, lovingly calls her out for it. I can't remember what the statement was, but Glennon had made a statement and Oprah had said, do you still think that's true? And she was like, hell no, not anymore. Yeah. So it's being all right with the getting it wrong, because everything is okay until it's not. So it's going to be right for you at one point, and then maybe it still will be, and then maybe it won't be, and then maybe it will be again. So if the intention is always the same, or the intention is always at least for the highest good, then it doesn't matter that you're getting it wrong along the way, because you're chipping away at different layers.
Totally. They've got I've written a quote down that I like, and that kind of reminded me of that, as intention, I think, is key, but it takes practice as to actually knowing what your intention is. I think I think even with intention, we can come from a place of a cage. I think in terms of a limiting belief is what I'm kind of aligning to there. But there was a quote she used on page 66, and I wrote this down because it really resonated with me. And for those of you who have read the book, you'll know at what point I'm talking about. If you haven't, then that's something for you to come back to. But she says, perhaps imagination is not where we go to escape reality, but where we go to remember it. And I think that's really powerful for me, in terms of, I do a lot of research and a lot of work, and my history is around, you know, working with children and families. And to see, even in your own children, the imagination that children have, in terms of themselves, in terms of their reality, in terms of the world around them. Children don't naturally sit themselves into boxes when they're born. It's society, from my perspective, that does that. Society naturally develops and puts us into those boxes as children, as we grow up. But I think that idea of removing layers or removing veils, as I heard somebody say recently, that imagination isn't something that's far-fetched and not achievable. I know you're into goal setting now and kind of removing limiting beliefs. And for me, there's a theme throughout Glennon's book is that idea of actually getting back to that, not something that's unachievable and something that nobody's done before in the world, but actually, who are you meant to be? What is your life before all these veils took place? I don't know if you want to make a comment on that now.
I'm just smiling to myself because I would have struggled with this concept so much before. I'd gone, yeah, kids have got great imagination, and but like, it's kids' imagination, and that's not real life. Life is hard, and you have to work, and you've got to make money, and those things are true. Like, money is very, very helpful. But actually, I'm smiling because I'm coming to realise that imagination, and for me, that's been quiet and still, and those pictures in my mind that I connect to and construct and create are more real than the stuff that's out there when you're opening your eyes. And again, this is why I love this book, because every little bit is a subject within inside itself.
Absolutely.
And as I say, because I've listened to it, not read it, and interestingly, I actually think there's probably more power in actually reading it and seeing the words than there is listening to it. That's just my suggestion. That even when she's addressing one subject, she can use a very, very good describing word to link it into another subject that she then talks about in the book. So when I'm talking about imagination and how I now feel that is more real than reality, that's something that I think we have to come to know for ourselves, or that doesn't resonate with us and it's not something that we ever come to know for ourselves. But going into that internal world that she sits in her closet to do, I'm beginning to realise that that's more real than anything else.
And you can prioritise that reality. It's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can prioritise that. And part of that is becoming this untamed that she talks about.
What do you mean you can prioritise that? Go on.
Okay, so for me, that prioritising is about your intuition, your knowing. Doing things that you know align strongly to you has the power to change your reality to align with your imagination. Glennon, for example, probably never imagined at some point that her life would drastically shift in that way. But once she allowed herself to see that picture, to manifest, I don't know if that's the best word, to manifest that reality, you've read the book or you've listened to the book, you know how her life changes. So that's what I mean by terms of kind of changing the reality for the better. But that takes courage and conviction in your intuition, in your knowing, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's
bravery, massive bravery.
Yeah, you're gonna have to write that down for me after. So when you set your intention to allow that, that's when you can, that's really like profound. And I think anyone that's maybe even studied The Secret or Law of Attraction and that concept, that beautifully sums that up. You're gonna have to write that one down for me. I think that's a gorgeous description, one that I can get my head around in a very helpful way.
But it takes conviction and bravery and vulnerability, doesn't it? And I know somebody else that we both watched and listened to, Brené Brown, she talks a lot about vulnerability and courage, and she's a shame researcher actually, but she says, you can't have vulnerability without courage, and you can't have courage without vulnerability. And to purposely put yourself in a state of alignment with your knowing or your intuition or whatever word you want to use for that takes massive amounts of inner work, massive amounts of bravery and courage, doesn't it? But I think Glennon's book for me is a perfect example of how significant changes can happen if you do that and allow yourself to do that, and allow yourself to engage with that imagination, engage with kind of your higher self and higher power.
Yeah. If I was to sum it up, for me, it would be becoming so totally aligned with what you really, really, really think. And to do that is, I know you mentioned earlier, the shadow work. To do that is to explore all of the dark sides and all of the dark stuff, and not being afraid to go and explore these subjects that are taboos or sensitive or take us to a dark place, to know that we're in a world of duality. That's what this planet is. So to get to the light, you've got to explore those dark sides and expose them, and truly, truly look at what you think and what's in alignment for you, is probably a lifetime process, which she does say we have a lifetime to do it.
She uses those words, and I think they're quite powerful. I think that's an interesting point, and I think duality is, without going too off topic or too in depth into that, an echoed theme throughout the book, isn't it? In terms of kind of having to deal with the good and the bad, the dark and the light, in order to reach that kind of divine intuition, or knowing, as she talks about.
Yeah, I mean, that beautiful moment when, I say beautiful moments, but she's talking about the divorce and how they're on an aeroplane. I've just said divorce. Sorry, guys. As in, not read the book. Anyway, she explores the subject of divorce. And she talks about it being turbulence. And that's fine. And, you can deal with turbulence, especially with your kids looking towards you for what their reaction needs to be in a dark situation. And then she's like, but yeah, what about if the plane actually is crashing now? And there's a lady that writes to her, and I think I cry through this chapter every time. Her child is actually dying, and I think she had a child before that had died of the same thing. We're not talking about small little paint a nice picture, come into alignment with yourself, find the light from. This is like real heavy, the worst stuff that could ever happen. Yet she's not afraid to explore those subjects and articulate the words that need to be articulated, not to be nice to people and make it fluffy, but to actually help people.
Be real. Absolutely. And I've got one kind of final thing that I wanted to draw in, and then I'll hand over to you if there's any key points you wanted to pull out. But for me, kind of taking this forward, and I think everything you read, well, it clearly has for us, but everything you read, you should kind of, make steps on in terms of action for your own alignment, for your own life. But one of the things that really stood out to me from this was that question as to how much of this should we pass on to children, to young women, to young men too, but in terms of kind of the experiences that we have in the world. And there's a quote she says quite early on in the book, actually. She says, "I cannot rid my children of the lies they will be told about what it means to become a real woman or man, but I can teach them how to be critics of culture instead of blind consumers of it." And that for me was really powerful, and something that as a parent, as a woman, as a mum, that I'm really kind of resonating around in my brain at the moment. But people have different opinions about that, but that idea of critics of culture isn't about slagging everything off. It isn't about going, oh, everything's a mess, but actually to balance, for me, the cages, the reality with that inner intuition. And that's a really difficult thing to teach children, but I think a really important one. I don't know if you have any comments on that now.
Yeah, I think that brings us really back to the first point that was made, that when we are exploring this or helping our kids with this as we struggle through it ourselves, to then be careful that we're not then creating more cages and more boxes for them. So yeah, to be able to critically or be critical and question culture, your own beliefs, society, your own parents' belief. It's so easy to then say, so this is what we do and this is what we are, rather than just go and explore and be open and know yourself. So yeah, it's go read the book, go listen to the book, go and explore the themes yourself. And yeah,
let us know what your kind of take on that is. I think, it's so fascinating to hear everybody's different take on what they're going to implement in their kind of lives from it.
Yeah.
Was there any other points in the book you wanted to pick out or pull out that we haven't talked about or touched on?
There are so many, especially about the charity work that she does with, again, read the book, but pulling people out the stream, if you like, and if you want to find out why they're in the stream drowning, follow the trail. Because I think that with what's happened with COVID over the last 12 months and how we've responded as human beings on the planet and stuff, and just maybe, don't be afraid to explore some subjects that maybe possibly will blow your mind, that's even allowed to exist or happen, or does it, or is it, are we being shown the full picture? Don't be afraid to go and explore those subjects. And again, know you're knowing about that. I don't want to go too much into that, but I just think that it's an important subject maybe for people who maybe aren't aware of that completely, to just go and explore why some people end up in the situations they end up. It's very easy to just say they got there by themselves, and I am all for being at cause and not effect. But there are some concepts that aren't very nice that actually are probably very true.
And don't be afraid of those. I think that's something that I got from that book too, is some things, we can live in a very blinkered world. Maybe that's a connection to cages there, but I think things that challenge are what we think is our knowing, come from a place of ego, and a place of one for a better fancy word, epistemic privilege. Basically your experiences, the privileges you've had in life, you watching this on a technological device, for example. Don't take those things for granted when we're looking at the lives of other people and the situations of other people. So yeah, I think that's a really powerful bit of the book, isn't it? That we'll leave people to have their own interpretation of that.
But so many layers to it, so many levels to it. I do recommend to most people that they go read it. Definitely not one just for, what's that, sorry?
With sticky notes.
Sticky notes. I've not met anybody yet who's read it. And that's not to say that people read it and don't get anything from it. I'm sure there are. But certainly within the people that I know and stuff, there's not one that's read it that hasn't just had their mind absolutely blown and grown as a person from it. She's an amazing author. She writes so beautifully. It's a true gift. I would say it was a channeled piece of work. Go explore it for yourself and let us know what you think.
Absolutely. I look forward to kind of hearing people's, I know we both do actually, a few people that are making their way through this, so it'd be good to hear their views and opinions. And I think the final kind of thing before we close this up is the connection back to bravery for me. And the thread that runs all the way through this in very many different aspects is it takes courage, it takes conviction, takes vulnerability to open ourselves up. And I think that's something that this title Untamed is about, breaking out of those boxes, but being putting yourself in that position to do so. So yeah, I hope it's been as powerful for other people as I know it has been for both of us. And please add comments, let us know. We want to know what you think, and share ideas. And we're all here to learn from each other, and I think that's a really powerful platform to do that in. So now, unless you've got any other comments, we'll round it up there. And thank you for listening, and we look forward to kind of engaging with you in the comments. So peace and love, and speak to you soon.